Left to die in the winter's cold, she was found by the Duke, and his love changed her destiny forever. The snowflakes fell like silent accusations upon the Cumberland forests. Marien Thorne stumbled forward, each laboured breath forming ghostly clouds before her pallid face. Her once fine gown, now torn and soiled, offered scant protection against winter's merciless assault. The blood from her scraped palms stained the pristine white blanket beneath her trembling form. "Let nature complete what we began," Lord Hargrove had sneered as he ordered the coachman to abandon her miles from any shelter. "The winter shall erase what remains of her dishonour." Night descended with cruel swiftness. Marien's lips, blue with cold, formed prayers no deity seemed inclined to answer. The wind's mournful howl mocked her fragile hope as darkness enveloped the forest path. Her family name, once respected throughout London's finest parlours, would now vanish beneath winter's shroud, all for a crime she had never committed. "I shall not die as they wish," she whispered, though her voice carried no further than her frozen breath. A branch snapped beneath her weight as she collapsed against the gnarled trunk of an ancient oak. The forest held its breath as hoofbeats approached, steady, deliberate, drawing nearer through the veil of falling snow. A dark silhouette emerged, tall upon a midnight steed. The beast's nostrils flared with steam as its rider halted, lamplight casting strange shadows across the snow-laden path. He dismounted with practiced grace, boots crunching upon the frozen ground. Even through her fading consciousness, Marien recognized nobility in his bearing, the unmistakable authority of one born to command. "What cruel jest is this?" The stranger's voice cut through the silence, deep and resonant as a church bell tolling judgment. A woman left to perish in winter's embrace? The world tilted and spun as Marien struggled to focus on the approaching figure. The lamplight revealed a face carved by experience rather than mere years, sharp cheekbones, a strong jaw partially concealed by a neatly trimmed beard, and eyes that contained both steel and sorrow. "Help me," she managed, her voice no more than a thread of sound quickly swallowed by the night. The stranger knelt beside her, removing his glove to press warm fingers against her throat. "You yet live," he murmured, more to himself than to her. "Providence has not abandoned you entirely." With unexpected tenderness, he unfastened his heavy cloak and wrapped it around her trembling form. The wool carried his warmth and the faint scent of cedar and tobacco, fragrances belonging to hearth and home, not this desolate forest path. "I am Lucan Vareth, Duke of Cailmore," he stated, not in introduction but in reassurance, as though his title alone might shield her from death's approach. "And I shall not permit winter to claim you." He lifted her with ease, cradling her against his chest, as though she weighed no more than a child. Through half-closed eyes, Marien observed the stern set of his jaw, the flakes of snow melting upon his dark hair. "The nearest village lies 2 hours hence," he said, securing her upon his horse before mounting behind her. "But my hunting lodge stands just beyond those pines." Consciousness slipped from Marien's grasp as the horse carried them deeper into the forest. The steady rhythm of the Duke's heartbeat against her back became her tether to life, a metronome counting out moments she had not expected to receive. "Stay with me," the Duke commanded, one arm holding her securely as the other guided the reins. "Death has no dominion this night." The hunting lodge emerged from the darkness like a vision, stone walls defying winter's siege, windows glowing with promised warmth. As they approached, the door swung open, spilling golden light across the pristine snow. "Your Grace," an elderly man exclaimed, eyes widening at the burden the Duke carried. "What manner of—" "Questions later, Harwick," the Duke interrupted, dismounting with his precious cargo. "Prepare the guest chamber and send for hot water. The lady hovers at death's threshold." As Marien was carried across the threshold, consciousness returned in fragmented moments, the crackling of a newly stoked fire, gentle hands removing her sodden garments, a warm cloth pressed against her frozen cheeks. Through it all, she heard the Duke's voice issuing commands, arranging for her comfort with the precision of a military campaign. "She shall not perish," he declared to someone unseen, "not while breath remains in my body." Dawn arrived with tentative fingers of light stretching across the snow-laden landscape. Marien awakened to unfamiliar surroundings, a chamber both modest and refined, walls adorned with hunting scenes rendered in muted oils. The bed beneath her felt impossibly soft after hours spent upon frozen ground, its linens crisp and scented with lavender. Memories of the previous night returned in disjointed fragments, the bitter cold, the approaching hoofbeats, strong arms lifting her from certain death. She struggled to sit upright, wincing as pain lanced through her frost-nipped extremities. "Pray, do not exert yourself," came a woman's voice, practical and unadorned. A matronly figure stepped into view, grey hair neatly tucked beneath a simple cap. "His Grace would be most displeased should you suffer a relapse." "His Grace," Marien echoed, her voice raw from exposure. "The Duke of Kailmore." "Indeed." The woman nodded, pouring steaming liquid from a porcelain pot. "I am Mrs. Harwick, housekeeper of Thornfield Lodge. His Grace discovered you near perished in the forest. A most fortunate intervention." Marien accepted the offered tea with trembling hands. "Where is he now?" "The Duke rides the perimeter with the gamekeeper. Winter brings desperate men to these woods." Mrs. Harwick adjusted the counterpane with practiced efficiency. "He instructed that you should want for nothing during his absence." The tea restored some warmth to Marien's core as sunlight strengthened beyond the frost-etched windows. She became suddenly acutely aware of her circumstances, alone in a strange man's hunting lodge, her reputation already in tatters. "I cannot remain," she announced, setting aside the teacup with renewed determination. "Kindly return my garments." Mrs. Harwick's expression revealed neither surprise nor judgment. "Your gown, miss, was beyond salvation. His Grace ordered suitable replacements from his sister's wardrobe at the manor. They shall arrive by midday." She paused, hands folded before her apron. "Until then, I fear you must practice patience." A sound from below, the heavy thud of a door closing, followed by measured footsteps upon the stairs, heralded the Duke's return. Mrs. Harwick straightened, smoothing invisible wrinkles from her apron. "Remember, child," she whispered urgently, "His Grace may appear stern, but he possesses a just heart." The Duke entered without ceremony, bringing with him the scent of winter air and horseflesh. His riding attire, though impeccably tailored, showed signs of hard use. A nobleman who valued function over fashion. Snow melted in dark rivulets from his boots onto the polished floorboards. "You have awakened," he observed, his tone revealing neither pleasure nor disappointment at this development. "How fares your constitution this morning?" Marien drew herself upright against the pillows, dignity her only armor. "I owe you my life, Your Grace, a debt I cannot hope to repay." Something flickered behind his grey eyes, a shadow of emotion quickly mastered. "I seek no recompense for common decency, miss." He paused, awaiting her name. "Thorn," she supplied after a moment's hesitation. "Marien Thorn." His posture stiffened almost imperceptibly. "Of the Northumberland Thorns?" "The same, Your Grace." She met his gaze without flinching. "Though I suspect they no longer claim me among their number." The Duke removed his gloves with deliberate movements, revealing strong hands marked by a nobleman's calluses, riding, fencing, perhaps the occasional scholarly pursuit. "You were abandoned," he stated, rather than asked. "Left to the winter's mercy." "Mercy was not the intention, I assure you." His jaw tightened. "By whom?" Marien hesitated, weighing the wisdom of disclosure against the debt of honesty she owed her rescuer. "Lord Hargrove orchestrated my removal, though the orders originated elsewhere." Hargrove. The Duke spat the name like poison upon his tongue. "A man whose courage extends precisely as far as his master's protection." Mrs. Harwick cleared her throat discreetly. "Shall I bring refreshments, Your Grace?" "Later, Mrs. Harwick." He dismissed her with a polite nod, waiting until the door closed before addressing Marien again. "Miss Thorn, I must speak plainly. The circumstances of our meeting suggest grave peril. Until I understand its nature, you remain under my protection. I cannot accept—" "You misunderstand." His voice, though quiet, carried absolute authority. "This is not an offer, but a declaration. The enemies who consigned you to death's embrace may yet seek to complete their task." Marien's fingers clutched at the counterpane. "You risk much for a stranger, Your Grace." "Perhaps." A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "Or perhaps Providence guided my path to yours with purpose." Before Marien could respond, a commotion erupted below. Urgent voices, the clatter of hurried footsteps. The Duke moved to the window, his expression hardening as he gazed toward the distant road. "Riders approach," he announced, voice stripped of earlier warmth. "3 men, armed. They come for me." Marien pushed aside the covers, ignoring the protest of her still weakened limbs. The Duke turned, decision crystallizing in his eyes. "Can you ride, Miss Thorn?" "Since childhood, Your Grace." "Good." He crossed to a concealed door, revealing a narrow servant's staircase. "Mrs. Harwick will provide suitable attire. Meet me at the stables in 10 minutes. His hand rested momentarily upon the ornate hilt of his riding crop. "We depart for Kailmore Manor forthwith. And if they demand my surrender?" The Duke's smile held no mirth, only iron determination. Then they shall learn that winter is not the only force in these woods capable of claiming lives. Kailmore Manor rose from the misty landscape like a sentinel of another age, its limestone facade weathered by centuries of Cumberland winters, its mullioned windows reflecting the weak afternoon sun. The journey from Thornfield Lodge had been swift and silent, with Lucerne leading them through forgotten forest paths, known only to those who had walked these lands since childhood. Marien, now dressed in a borrowed riding habit of midnight blue, felt the weight of exhaustion pressing upon her shoulders. The Duke rode beside her, his vigilance never wavering as they approached the ancient estate. No words had passed between them since their hasty departure, save for occasional directions whispered in tones that brooked no question. "We have arrived," he announced, as the gravel drive curved toward the manor's imposing entrance. Kailmore has stood for 8 generations of Variths, not always in glory but always in honor. The statement carried a curious undercurrent, as though he addressed not only her, but some unseen audience judging his words. Marien studied the Duke's profile, noting the tension that had settled upon his features since their flight from the hunting lodge. "Your ancestral home is magnificent," she offered, seeking to bridge the silence that had grown between them. "It is a fortress, Miss Thorne." He dismounted with practiced ease, moving to assist her. "And fortresses exist for one purpose alone, to withstand siege." His hands at her waist were impersonal, yet somehow intimate, as he lifted her from the saddle. For a moment, they stood closer than propriety allowed, his eyes searching hers with unexpected intensity. "You tremble," he observed quietly. "The cold, Your Grace." "Indeed." He stepped back, resuming the proper distance. "Though I suspect your shivers owe as much to uncertainty as to winter's breath." Before she could formulate a response, the manor's doors swung open to reveal a distinguished gentleman whose bearing matched the Duke's own. Grey temples and lines of experience marked him as Lucerne's senior, yet the resemblance between them was unmistakable. "Brother," the man called, descending the steps with measured haste. "We received no word of your return. Circumstances demanded discretion, Edward." Lucerne placed a protective hand at Marien's elbow, guiding her forward. "May I present Miss Marien Thorne? She requires sanctuary." Edward Varith, heir presumptive to the dukedom, executed a flawless bow despite the surprise evident in his expression. "Miss Thorne, Kailmore extends its welcome." "You are most kind, sir," Marien replied, summoning the last vestiges of her finishing school deportment. Servants materialized to attend to the horses as Lucerne ushered Marien into the manor's vaulted entrance hall. Portraits of stern-faced Variths gazed down from oak-paneled walls, their painted eyes seeming to assess this unexpected visitor to their domain. "Lady Sophia will wish to greet our guest," Edward remarked as they proceeded toward the grand staircase. "She has few companions this far from London society." "My wife," Lucerne explained to Marien, "though I fear she finds country life somewhat lacking in diversion." Edward's expression tightened almost imperceptibly. Indeed, Lady Sophia has expressed her disappointment with Cumberland's limited entertainments on numerous occasions. An unspoken current passed between the brothers, some private understanding or long-standing tension, before Lucerne turned his attention back to Marien. "You require rest, Miss Thorne. Mrs. Winters will show you to the East Chamber." As if summoned by her name, the housekeeper appeared, a dignified woman whose sharp eyes missed nothing of Marien's disheveled state. "This way, if you please, miss." Marien hesitated, suddenly reluctant to leave the Duke's protective presence. "Your Grace, we shall speak at dinner," he assured her, his voice softening for the first time since their departure from the hunting lodge. "Until then, recover your strength. Kailmore's walls have withstood greater threats than those who pursue you." The East Chamber proved to be a sanctuary of unexpected luxury, a 4-poster bed draped in emerald velvet, a marble fireplace already blazing with welcome warmth, and windows that overlooked snow-covered formal gardens stretching toward distant fells. Mrs. Winters efficiently arranged for a bath to be drawn and fresh garments to be provided. "Her ladyship has graciously offered some of her gowns," the housekeeper explained, as maids carried in steaming water. "They may require minor alterations, but they shall suffice until more suitable arrangements can be made." Alone at last, Marien sank into the copper bath with a sigh that came from the depths of her soul. The water's embrace soothed muscles strained by fear and flight, yet her mind found no corresponding peace. Lord Hargrove's men would not abandon their pursuit easily, not when her silence was all that stood between their master and ruin. A soft knock interrupted her troubled thoughts. A maid entered, bearing a small leather-bound book upon a silver salver. "From His Grace, miss," the girl explained, bobbing a curtsy. "He said you might desire occupation for your thoughts." The volume proved to be a collection of sonnets, its pages well thumbed by previous readers. A slip of parchment marked one particular poem, the ink of the Duke's bold handwriting clearly visible. "When winter seeks to claim the defenseless flower, Providence oft sends an unexpected shield. L.V." Marien traced the words with trembling fingers, something unfamiliar unfurling within her chest, a sensation both warm and terrifying in its newness. Dinner at Kalemore Manor was evidently a formal affair, regardless of the household's isolation. Marien descended the grand staircase in borrowed finery, a gown of midnight blue silk that whispered with each step, its modest neckline adorned with a single strand of pearls provided by Mrs. Winters at her ladyship's insistence. The Duke awaited her at the foot of the stairs, resplendent in evening attire that emphasized the breadth of his shoulders and the lean strength of his frame. For a moment he appeared transfixed, his customary reserve faltering as his gaze traveled from the arrangement of her hair to the tips of her satin slippers. "You do her ladyship's wardrobe considerable justice, Miss Thorne," he finally remarked, offering his arm. "I trust you found your accommodations satisfactory?" "More than satisfactory, Your Grace. I lack words to express my gratitude for your kindness to a stranger." Something flickered behind his eyes, an emotion she could not quite name. "You may find, Miss Thorne, that we are not strangers at all, but merely unacquainted until now." The dining room glowed with candlelight, silver gleaming against damask, as footmen stood at attention along the walls. Edward Vareth rose as they entered, accompanied by a striking woman whose beauty was matched only by the calculation evident in her appraising stare. "Lady Sophia," Lucen announced. "May I present Miss Marien Thorne, our guest?" Lady Sophia Vareth was the type of beauty London society celebrated. Porcelain complexion, golden hair arranged in artful disarray, and eyes of cornflower blue that sparkled with practiced charm. Yet something in her smile failed to reach those eyes as she extended a gloved hand toward Marien. "Miss Thorne," she pronounced, her voice melodious yet cool as mountain streams. "How fortunate that my husband discovered you in your time of need. We rarely entertain unexpected guests at Kalemore, particularly in winter." "Your hospitality honors me, Lady Sophia," Marien replied, executing a perfect curtsy despite her weakened state. The Duchess gestured toward the table with languid elegance. "Pray be seated. I understand your circumstances were quite dramatic." The emphasis she placed on the final word carried subtle insinuation. Marien felt, rather than saw, the Duke stiffen beside her as he guided her to her place. "Miss Thorne has endured an ordeal that would have broken lesser spirits," Lucen stated, his tone brooking no further inquiry. "She requires rest, not interrogation." Edward Vareth cleared his throat diplomatically. "The kitchens have prepared pheasant this evening. A fortuitous coincidence. As I recall, the Thornes of Northumberland are renowned for their game preserves." Marien accepted a glass of wine from a hovering footman. "Indeed, sir, though I confess it has been some time since I walked my family's grounds." "And what brings you to Cumberland, Miss Thorne?" Lady Sophia inquired, her smile never faltering. "So far from your ancestral home?" Lucen answered before Marien could formulate a response. "A matter requiring discretion, my dear. One I shall explain when circumstances permit." The Duchess's fingers tightened imperceptibly around her silverware. "How mysterious! One might almost suspect a conspiracy between you." "Sophia," Edward cautioned softly, "merely an observation, brother." She turned her attention to the first course, a clear consommé that steamed in delicate porcelain. "Cumberland breeds such fascinating secrets, does it not? The isolation encourages unusual alliances." The Duke's expression remained impassive, though Marien noticed a muscle working in his jaw. "Miss Thorne," he said, deliberately changing the subject, "I understand the Northumberland Thornes descend from Norman stock." 5 centuries of documented lineage, Your Grace," Marien confirmed, grateful for the diversion. "Though recent generations have seen our fortunes somewhat diminished." "A common tale among the old families," Edward remarked sympathetically. "Land rich and coin poor, as our father used to say." Lady Sophia's laugh tinkled like breaking glass. "How fortunate, then, that some families find ways to replenish their coffers through advantageous connections." The implication hung in the air like poison gas. Marien lowered her spoon. Appetite suddenly vanished beneath the weight of the Duchess's insinuation. The Duke's hand descended upon the table with sufficient force to rattle the crystal. "Enough, Sophia," he commanded, voice pitched low but carrying unmistakable authority. "You forget yourself." A tense silence descended, broken only by the muted movements of servants replacing the first course with the promised pheasant. Edward attempted recovery with remarks about the unusually heavy snowfall, while Lady Sophia maintained a smile that failed to conceal the calculation behind her eyes. As the meal progressed, Marien became increasingly aware of currents running beneath the polite conversation, old resentments and unspoken accusations circling the table like invisible predators. The Duke remained outwardly composed, yet she sensed a gathering storm behind his controlled facade. "Perhaps Miss Thorne would favor us with details of her journey," Lady Sophia suggested, as dessert was served, a delicate apple charlotte that Marien could not bring herself to taste. "It must have been quite an adventure, culminating in my husband's timely rescue." "My journey is unremarkable," Marien replied carefully, "though I remain eternally grateful for His Grace's intervention." The Duchess's smile sharpened. "Indeed, Lucin has always possessed a remarkable talent for intervening where least expected." "A trait inherited from our father," Edward interjected, shooting a warning glance at his sister-in-law. "The late Duke never could resist championing those in distress." "How fortunate that such nobility runs in Vareth blood," Sophia remarked, her tone suggesting precisely the opposite sentiment. "Though one wonders where such gallantry was when—" "A moment, if you please," the Duke interrupted, rising abruptly. All eyes turned to him as he inclined his head toward the window. "Do you hear that?" In the silence that followed, Marien detected what had captured his attention, the distant but unmistakable approach of horses, moving at speed through the estate's outer reaches. "Visitors at this hour?" Edward frowned, moving to join his brother at the window. The Duke's expression hardened into granite resolve. "Not visitors, Edward. Hunters." Lady Sophia set down her dessert fork with deliberate precision. "Really, Lucin, your penchant for melodrama grows tedious." "Miss Thorne," the Duke said, ignoring his wife's barb, "I must insist you retire to your chamber immediately. Edward will escort you." Marien rose, heart hammering against her ribs. "They've found me." "They have found Kaelmore," he corrected, his gaze meeting hers with fierce reassurance. "But they shall not find you." Edward offered his arm with grave courtesy. "This way, Miss Thorne. The East Wing possesses certain architectural advantages unknown to those unfamiliar with the manor." As they departed, Marien glanced back to see the Duke conferring urgently with the butler, his profile stark against the firelight. Lady Sophia remained seated, a curious smile playing about her lips as she sipped her wine, with the air of one settling in for an anticipated entertainment. The East Wing corridor stretched before them like a tunnel into shadow, interrupted only by pools of lamplight that created more darkness than illumination. Edward moved with quiet purpose, his expression betraying no alarm despite the gravity of their situation. "My brother," he said suddenly, breaking the tense silence, "is a more complicated man than he appears, Miss Thorne. I would not presume to judge His Grace's character on such brief acquaintance," Marien replied carefully. Edward's smile held genuine warmth, admirably diplomatic, yet I suspect you have discerned more of Lucin's nature than many who claim longer familiarity. They paused before a section of oak paneling indistinguishable from the rest. Edward's fingers found an invisible mechanism, and the wall swung inward to reveal a narrow staircase ascending into darkness. "The priest's hole," he explained, retrieving a lamp from a nearby alcove, "a relic of less tolerant times when faith could cost one's head. It connects to a chamber unknown to all but the Vareth heirs." Marien hesitated at the threshold of the hidden passage. "Lord Edward, I cannot express sufficient gratitude for your family's protection." "We Vareths protect our own, Miss Thorne." Something in his tone suggested layers of meaning beyond the immediate circumstances. "Now go. Lucin will come for you when danger has passed." As the panel closed behind her, Marien ascended worn stone steps, illuminated only by the flickering lamp. The weight of centuries pressed upon her, generations of secrets and desperate flights embedded in the very stones of this ancient house. Below she heard the distant sound of the manor's main doors opening, followed by the authoritative voice of the Duke addressing unwelcome visitors. In that moment, surrounded by darkness and stone, Marien Thorne made a silent vow that she would not bring destruction upon this household that had sheltered her, whatever the cost to herself. The hidden chamber proved a curious blend of sanctuary and prison, a circular room nestled between the manor's east tower walls, furnished sparingly with a narrow bed, a writing desk, and shelves lined with leather-bound volumes. A small fireplace held dying embers that cast restless shadows across ancient tapestries, depicting hunting scenes from another century. Marien placed the lamp upon the desk, discovering a letter opener fashioned from a stag's antler, the first weapon, however modest, that had come within her reach since her ordeal began. She concealed it within the folds of her borrowed gown, the weight of it against her palm offering small comfort as she strained to catch sounds from below. Hours passed in tense solitude. The fire dwindled to ash, and still no one came. When sleep finally claimed her, it brought dreams of snow-covered forests and pursuing horsemen, whose faces shifted between Lord Hargrove's sneering countenance and Lady Sophia's calculating smile. She awoke to the scrape of stone against stone, the hidden door opening with deliberate slowness. Marien grasped the letter opener, positioning herself beside the entrance as a tall figure ducked through the low archway. "Your caution is warranted," came the Duke's familiar voice, "though I should prefer not to be stabbed for my troubles." Moonlight spilled through the room's single window, illuminating his features, weariness etched in lines that had not been present at dinner. A shadow of stubble darkened his jaw, and his evening attire showed signs of physical confrontation. "Forgive me, Your Grace," Marien said, lowering her improvised weapon. "Did they have departed," he confirmed, moving to rekindle the fire. "Though not, I fear, with any conviction regarding your absence." "Who were they?" "Hargrove's men, as you suspected. 3 of them, led by a particularly unpleasant individual named Crow." The Duke's mouth twisted with distaste. "They carried a warrant for your arrest on charges of theft." Marien's breath caught painfully in her throat. "Theft? I have stolen nothing in my life." So I informed them with perhaps more force than diplomacy required. A grim smile touched his lips as he straightened, firelight casting his shadow across half the chamber. Crow departed with a broken nose to accompany his lies. "You struck him?" Marien whispered, horrified at the potential consequences. "Edward struck him," the Duke corrected. "I merely ensured he remained conscious to receive our message." Despite the gravity of the situation, Marien found herself fighting an inappropriate urge to laugh. What message was that, precisely? That the hospitality of Kailmore extends to all legitimate officers of the law, but that those bearing false witness would find Cumberland justice remarkably efficient. He moved toward her, concern evident in his expression. "Are you well? You were confined here longer than I intended." "I am unharmed," she assured him, though her legs trembled with relief and lingering fear. "Though I confess to some confusion regarding your willingness to confront armed men on behalf of a woman you scarcely know." The Duke's gaze held hers with unexpected intensity. "Perhaps I know you better than circumstance would suggest, Miss Thorne." Something in his tone sent a shiver of apprehension along her spine. "I do not take your meaning, Your Grace." He gestured toward a chair, waiting until she was seated before continuing. 16 years ago, the Thornes of Northumberland hosted a summer gathering. I was but 20, fresh from university, and full of reformist ideals that amused my father greatly. His eyes never left her face as he spoke. "A child approached me in the gardens, a girl of perhaps 7, with auburn hair and uncommon gravity for one so young." Marien's heart began a rapid tattoo against her ribs as buried memories stirred. "She asked if you truly intended to change the laws regarding orphaned children in parish workhouses," she whispered. Surprise flickered across his features. "You remember." "I remember a young man who knelt to address a child at eye level rather than dismissing her questions." Marien's fingers twisted in the folds of her gown, a rare courtesy that left an impression. "As did you, Miss Thorne." The Duke leaned forward, his voice softening. "I have followed your family's fortunes from afar, including the scandal of your father's death and your cousin's subsequent assumption of the estate." "Then you know I am penniless," she stated with quiet dignity, "a dependent first of my uncle's charity and later of Lord Hargrove's supposed benevolence. I know that Lord Hargrove serves as executor for the Thorne properties until your 25th birthday." His expression darkened. "A convenient arrangement that grants him control of considerable assets while relegating you to virtual imprisonment as his ward." Marien stared at him, astonishment momentarily robbing her of speech. "How could you possibly know the terms of my father's will?" "Because I challenged them," he replied simply. "When news reached me of your situation, I petitioned the courts for a review of the inheritance provisions." "You?" Her voice emerged as little more than a whisper. "Why would you involve yourself in my affairs?" The Duke's eyes reflected the dancing flames as he regarded her. "I made a promise to that child in the garden that I would use my position to protect those who could not protect themselves." His hand clenched briefly at his side. "I have failed that promise too often. I did not intend to fail again." Understanding dawned with terrible clarity. The theft charges. They aren't about stolen property at all. No, he confirmed grimly. They are about silencing you before your birthday, creating a pretext to declare you unfit to inherit. A convicted thief cannot claim her father's estate. And my death in the forest would have accomplished the same end, she concluded, ice forming around her heart. With greater finality. Precisely. The Duke rose, pacing the confines of the circular room like a caged predator. Hargrove grows desperate as your birthday approaches. My legal inquiries forced his hand. Marien pressed trembling fingers against her temples, trying to absorb the implications of these revelations. So my presence here endangers not only myself, but your entire household. Kael'mor has weathered greater storms. He dismissed her concern with a gesture that encompassed the ancient walls surrounding them. This fortress was built to withstand siege, as I told you. Yet not all threats come from without. The words escaped before she could reconsider their wisdom. Lady Sophia seems displeased by my presence. The Duke's expression shuttered, revealing nothing of his thoughts. My wife finds country life isolating. Your arrival provides diversion, if not the kind she might have chosen. The diplomatic evasion told Marien more than a direct answer might have. She rose, moving toward the room's small window, where moonlight silvered the snow-covered landscape below. I cannot remain at Kael'mor, she said quietly. Lord Hargrove will send others with more legitimate authority. I would not have your family suffer for my sake. And where would you go? He challenged, joining her at the window. London offers no sanctuary. Hargrove's influence pervades the capital. Scotland, perhaps, or passage to the continent. Flight is precisely what Hargrove desires, the Duke countered. It would validate the false charges and cement his control of your inheritance. Their reflections in the glass stood side by side, his towering presence making her seem smaller, more vulnerable than she felt. Yet in that moment, Marien found strength in the very injustice that had pursued her to this remote sanctuary. Then I shall neither flee nor hide, she declared, turning to face him directly. If Lord Hargrove wishes to destroy me, let him attempt it before witnesses whose integrity cannot be questioned. A smile of genuine admiration transformed the Duke's austere features. Spoken like a true Thorn, he bowed with formal respect that contained no hint of condescension. Rest assured, Miss Thorn, that while you remain under my protection, no harm shall befall you from Hargrove or any other quarter. The unspoken any other quarter hung between them, its implication clear. Whatever threat Lady Sophia might represent, the Duke acknowledged it without words. Dawn approaches, he observed, glancing toward the window where the first faint lightening of the eastern sky had begun. I shall escort you to your chamber. The servants need not know you spent the night elsewhere. As they descended the hidden staircase, Marien gathered her courage to ask the question that had troubled her since dinner. Your Grace, may I speak plainly? I would expect nothing less. Why did you marry her? The Duke's steps faltered for only a moment before resuming their measured pace. When he finally answered, his voice carried the weight of obligations she could only begin to understand. Some choices, Miss Thorn, are made for reasons that transcend personal preference. He paused at the bottom of the stairs, his profile carved in shadow. The Vareth name required restoration after my father's indiscretions. Lady Sophia's family offered connections and financial stability at a critical moment. A marriage of convenience, then. A marriage of necessity, he corrected, his tone closing the subject as definitively as the hidden panel sealed the priest's hole behind them. The library at Kael'mor Manor occupied the entire West Wing's ground floor, a cathedral to knowledge with vaulted ceilings, oak shelves stretching toward heaven, and windows tall enough to admit pools of light across the parquet floor. In the week since her arrival, Marien had claimed a window seat overlooking the snow-covered rose garden as her sanctuary, a place where she might lose herself in volumes of poetry and history while the household maintained its rhythm around her. Lord Edward joined her there most afternoons, bringing fresh tea and conversation that helped piece together the complex history of the Vareth dynasty. The Duke himself appeared rarely, consumed by estate business and correspondence that frequently kept him closeted in his study until late hours. Lady Sophia, to Marien's relief, had departed for a neighbouring estate 3 days after the night visitors, declaring that Kael'mor's gloom threatened her delicate constitution. Her absence lifted a pall from the manor, allowing servants to move with lighter steps and conversation to flow more freely at mealtimes. My sister-in-law, Edward remarked on this particular afternoon, settling into a leather chair opposite Marien's window seat, finds country life devoid of suitable diversions, particularly in winter. Marien closed her book, a collection of Byron's more melancholy works. Her absence must be a terrible trial for his grace. The wry smile that crossed Edward's features suggested otherwise. Lucien bears his suffering with remarkable fortitude. He glanced toward the door before continuing in a lower tone. Their union was never one of affection, you understand. The Blakely fortune saved Cailmore from ruin after my father's death. The Duke mentioned certain indiscretions, a polite term for catastrophic gambling debts and several mistresses maintained at ruinous expense. Edward's expression softened with remembered pain. Our father was a complicated man, capable of great kindness and equally great foolishness. Lucan shouldered the consequences of both when he inherited at 25. Marien considered this information thoughtfully. Lady Sophia's dowry restored the estate's finances. Her father's conditions were explicit: marriage to secure the alliance and an heir to cement it. Edward sighed, gazing out at the winter landscape. 5 years have passed without the latter, creating tensions. I see, Marien murmured, though in truth she glimpsed only the edges of what clearly constituted a complex and painful situation. Their conversation halted as the library door opened to admit the Duke himself, snow still clinging to his greatcoat and boots. His face, reddened by cold, brightened visibly upon seeing the room's occupants. Ah, the literary society convenes, I see. He removed his gloves, approaching the fire with a nod of greeting. What profound matters occupy your discussion this afternoon? Edward rose with the easy grace that characterized his movements. Miss Thorne was educating me regarding Byron's reflections on mortality. Cheerful winter reading? Indeed. The Duke's gaze settled on Marien with warm interest. And what verdict does our scholar render on the poet's philosophy? That he confused melancholy with profundity, she replied, surprised by her own boldness, and mistook self-indulgence for insight. A genuine laugh escaped him, a sound so unexpected that both Marien and Edward started slightly. Brave words, Miss Thorne. The literary world trembles before your judgment. The literary world remains blissfully unaware of my opinions, Your Grace. More's the pity. He moved closer, regarding her with undisguised appreciation. Clarity of thought deserves an audience. Edward cleared his throat discreetly. I shall leave you to continue this debate while I attend to correspondence. His departure carried a hint of tactical retreat, as though he recognized currents in the room that required privacy. Alone with the Duke, Marien felt a curious fluttering beneath her ribs, not fear, precisely, but awareness of something unspoken hovering between them. He removed his greatcoat, revealing riding attire that emphasized the breadth of his shoulders and the lean strength of his frame. I bring news from London, he announced without preamble, settling into the chair his brother had vacated. My solicitor has uncovered discrepancies in Lord Hargrove's management of the Thorne properties. Marien sat straighter, setting aside her book. What manner of discrepancies? Systematic misappropriation of income from timber sales and tenant rents. His expression hardened. Funds that should have been held in trust for you were diverted to his personal accounts. He robbed me while accusing me of theft, Marien whispered, bitter irony coating her tongue. How very symmetrical. The evidence is compelling but requires corroboration. The Duke leaned forward, his eyes intent upon her face. Did you ever witness Hargrove signing documents regarding the estate or discussing financial matters with his solicitors? Marien closed her eyes, summoning memories of her life at Hargrove House. His study. He would often review papers after dinner, particularly following quarter days when rents were collected. And did you ever see these papers? Once. Her eyes opened, focusing on a point beyond the Duke's shoulder as the scene reconstructed itself. I entered without knocking, a terrible breach of etiquette that earned me a week confined to my room, but before he could conceal his work, I glimpsed ledgers with the Thorne crest. The Duke's expression tightened with controlled anger. Did he know you recognized the documents? I believe so. A chill spread through her limbs as connections formed. The theft accusations began shortly afterward. Jewelry missing from Lady Hargrove's rooms, then silver from the dining service, creating a pattern to justify more serious charges later. He nodded grimly. A calculated campaign to discredit your testimony should you ever challenge his management. Marien rose abruptly, pacing toward the nearest bookshelf, where her fingers traced leather spines without seeing the titles. All these years, she said softly, I believed my father left me nothing but a name. He left you considerably more. The Duke joined her, close enough that she could detect the scent of horse and winter air still clinging to his clothing. The Thorne estate generates annual income sufficient to support you in modest comfort, independent of any man's charity. which explains Hargrove's determination to maintain control past my birthday. Anger replaced shock, straightening her spine and hardening her resolve. What must I do to reclaim what is rightfully mine? Testify before the magistrate in Carlisle. His answer came without hesitation. My solicitor has prepared affidavits regarding the financial improprieties, but your personal testimony regarding Hargrove's behavior would strengthen the case immeasurably. When? 3 days hence. He studied her with concern. It means leaving Kailmore's protection, facing Hargrove directly. There would be risk. There has been risk since the moment I glimpsed those ledgers, Marien replied, meeting his gaze steadily. I am prepared to face whatever consequences may come. Something shifted in the Duke's expression, respect deepening into an emotion she dared not name. You possess remarkable courage, Miss Thorne. Not courage, Your Grace. Necessity. She turned back toward the window, watching snow begin to fall in gentle spirals beyond the glass. One cannot hide forever behind even the strongest walls. No, he agreed quietly. Though sometimes protection serves not to conceal weakness, but to nurture strength until it is ready to confront injustice. The weight of his words settled around her shoulders like a mantle, not a burden, but a commission, an acknowledgement of capacity she had not recognized in herself until this moment. Then I am ready, she declared, turning to face him fully. Let us confront Lord Hargrove and reclaim what he has stolen, not merely property, but years of dignity and independence. The Duke bowed, formal yet intimate in its execution. As you wish, Miss Thorne. He straightened, authority emanating from him like heat from flame. We depart for Carlisle tomorrow. I shall make all necessary arrangements. As he moved toward the door, Marien called after him. Your Grace? He paused, hand upon the latch. Yes? Why? The question contained all she could not articulate. Why this commitment to her cause? Why this personal investment in justice for a woman who, until recently, had been little more than a childhood memory? The Duke considered her for a long moment, snowlight casting his features in marble relief. Because 16 years ago, a child in a garden reminded me of principles I had begun to forget. His voice softened, weighted with meaning beyond the immediate words. And because some debts can never be repaid, only honored through service to what is right. With that he departed, leaving Marien alone with swirling snow beyond the window and the dawning realization that her heart had begun to tread dangerous ground, forming attachments where none could honorably exist. The journey to Carlisle commenced at first light, a procession of 2 carriages departing Kailmore's gates beneath a sky heavy with unshed snow. Marien travelled in the Duke's personal coach, a well-sprung vehicle lined with burgundy velvet and equipped with heated bricks to ward off the bitter cold. Lord Edward accompanied them, his presence providing both additional protection and the propriety necessary for a lady travelling under ducal escort. The magistrate's court convenes at noon tomorrow, the Duke explained, as the carriages navigated the winding road that descended from Kailmore's elevated position. My solicitor, Mr. Blackwood, will present the financial evidence first, establishing a pattern of misappropriation. Your testimony will follow, addressing Hargrove's personal conduct. Marien's gloved hands twisted in her lap. And if Lord Hargrove appears to challenge the accusations? He will certainly appear, the Duke confirmed, his expression grim. A summons has been issued requiring his presence to answer the charges. Edward leaned forward, his customary good humor replaced by solemn resolve. Miss Thorne, you should prepare yourself. Hargrove will not surrender control of your inheritance without deploying every weapon at his disposal, including attacks upon your character and credibility. I am acquainted with Lord Hargrove's methods, sir. Marien's voice remained steady despite the apprehension coiling in her stomach. He has spent years ensuring I understand precisely how little my word would count against his. The Duke's hand clenched upon his walking stick, knuckles whitening beneath taut skin. Therein lies his fundamental error. Your testimony will not stand alone, but will be supported by documented evidence and the statements of witnesses who have already come forward. Witnesses? Marien turned to him in surprise. Who would risk Hargrove's displeasure on my behalf? Former servants from your father's household, Edward supplied, and a rather remarkable chambermaid from Hargrove House itself, a young woman named Clara Foster, who observed the systematic campaign to discredit you. The name sent a jolt of recognition through Marien. Clara was kind to me when others followed Lady Hargrove's example of cold disdain. I had no idea she noticed such matters. She noticed a great deal, the Duke affirmed, including Lord Hargrove planting items of jewellery among your possessions before declaring them stolen. Fury and vindication warred within Marien's breast as pieces of her ordeal aligned into coherent pattern. "All this time," she whispered, "I questioned my own memory, wondered if perhaps grief for my father had affected my mind as Lady Hargrove suggested." "A deliberate strategy," the Duke's voice hardened with contained anger. "Isolation, gaslighting, systematic undermining of self-trust, tactics employed by those who seek absolute control." Edward's hand moved briefly to cover Marien's clenched fingers. "Courage, Miss Thorne. The truth emerges, however determined its enemies." The journey continued in contemplative silence, each passenger absorbed in private thoughts as Cumberland's dramatic landscape unfolded beyond the carriage windows. Halfway to Carlisle, they halted at a coaching inn where chambers had been reserved for a brief respite. While the horses were changed and refreshments prepared, Marien withdrew to a private parlour, seeking a moment's solitude to compose herself. The enormity of confronting Lord Hargrove, of challenging a man whose influence extended throughout London society, threatened to overwhelm her hard-won resolve. A discreet knock preceded the Duke's entrance, his tall figure momentarily blocking the doorway before he stepped inside, closing the door with deliberate care. "Forgive the intrusion," he began, remaining at a proper distance, "but there are matters we must discuss privately before reaching Carlisle." Marien gestured toward a chair. "Of course, Your Grace." He declined the invitation to sit, instead moving to stand before the fireplace, flames casting his profile in stark relief. "Mr. Blackwood has uncovered additional information regarding your father's death." The words struck like physical blows. "My father died of apoplexy," she stated automatically, reciting the official determination. "The physician confirmed it." "The physician was in Lord Hargrove's employ," the Duke countered gently, "and there were irregularities in his examination." Marien's legs weakened beneath her, forcing her to seek the nearest chair. "Are you suggesting—" "I suggest nothing, Miss Thorne. I merely present facts as they have been discovered." His eyes held compassion that somehow made the moment more unbearable. "Your father had begun investigating discrepancies in estate accounts shortly before his death. He wrote to his solicitor in London, expressing grave concerns regarding his brother-in-law's management of certain investments." "Lord Hargrove was married to my aunt," Marien whispered. "She died 2 years before my father, creating opportunity for Hargrove to insinuate himself into your father's business affairs as a grieving relation." The Duke's voice remained steady, though tension radiated from his rigid posture. "The timing of your father's death, occurring the very evening he had scheduled a meeting with his banker, raises questions that were never properly addressed." Horror spread through Marien's veins like ice water. "You believe Lord Hargrove murdered my father to gain control of the estate. I believe the possibility warrants investigation." He moved toward her then, kneeling at her side with a grace that belied his imposing stature. "But that is not our immediate battle. The magistrate tomorrow will address only the financial improprieties and the false accusations against you." "How can I think of mere money when my father may have been—" Her voice broke, tears threatening for the first time since her rescue from the snow. The Duke's hand covered hers, warm and solid against her trembling fingers. "Justice comes in stages, Miss Thorne. First we secure your inheritance and clear your name. Then, with resources restored and your position secure, we pursue the greater truth." "We?" The question escaped before she could consider its implications. His eyes held hers with unwavering intensity. "Did you imagine I would abandon your cause halfway to completion? I am not a man who leaves obligations unfulfilled." "Obligation," she echoed, the word tasting bitter despite its honorable intent. "Of course." Something shifted in his expression. Recognition, perhaps, of the inadequacy of his chosen term. "Forgive me. I expressed myself poorly." He rose, resuming a more appropriate distance. "My commitment to your cause transcends mere duty, Miss Thorne. I have come to—" He stopped, recalibrating his approach. "That is, your courage and dignity in the face of profound injustice command my deepest respect." The careful correction spoke volumes about boundaries unacknowledged, yet keenly felt between them. Marien smoothed her skirts, gathering composure around herself like armor. "I appreciate your candor regarding my father, Your Grace," she said formally, steering towards safer ground. "The information, while distressing, strengthens my resolve for tomorrow's proceedings." He accepted the redirection with a slight bow. "We should depart within the hour. The weather threatens to worsen, and I would prefer to reach Carlisle before nightfall." As he moved toward the door, Marien called after him, "Your Grace?" He paused, hand on the latch. "Yes?" When all this concludes, when justice is served and my inheritance secured, what becomes of our association? The question contained layers she dared not articulate, even to herself. The Duke studied her for a long moment, his expression unreadable. That, Miss Thorne, must remain for destiny to determine. With a formal nod he departed, leaving her alone with unanswered questions and emotions too complex to unravel in the brief interval before their journey resumed. The remainder of the journey passed in subdued conversation, the looming confrontation casting shadows over previously easy exchanges between the three travellers. They reached Carlisle as darkness fell, the cathedral city's stone buildings emerging from winter mist like sentinels from another age. The Duke had arranged accommodations at the Crown and Mitre, the city's finest establishment, where separate suites awaited their party. "Rest well, Miss Thorne," the Duke advised as a maid escorted her toward the stairs. "Tomorrow requires all your strength." "And yours, Your Grace," she replied, holding his gaze for a moment that stretched beyond propriety. "I shall not forget that you stand with me in this battle." His answering smile contained warmth that briefly banished winter's chill. Until morning, then. Sleep proved elusive, despite the comfort of her chambers. Marien paced before the fire, rehearsing responses to questions that might arise during her testimony, steeling herself against Hargrove's inevitable attempts to discredit her. When dawn finally illuminated the frost-covered window panes, she greeted it with the clear-eyed determination of one who has reconciled herself to fate's judgment. The magistrate's court occupied the ground floor of Carlisle's imposing town hall, a chamber of oak paneling and somber dignity where justice had been dispensed for generations. Marien entered on the Duke's arm, her borrowed finery providing a shield of respectability against the curious stares of court officials and spectators. Mr. Blackwood awaited them, a slight man with shrewd eyes and an air of contained energy that belied his advanced years. "Your Grace, Miss Thorne," he bowed with efficient precision. "All is in readiness. The magistrate has reviewed the preliminary documents and expresses keen interest in the evidence." "And Lord Hargrove?" the Duke inquired, scanning the chamber. "Not yet arrived, though his solicitor presented himself an hour past." Blackwood's thin lips curved in a smile devoid of humour. "They request postponement on grounds of insufficient time to prepare a defence." "Denied, I trust?" "Most emphatically." Blackwood guided them towards seats positioned near the magistrate's bench. "The court recognises the urgency, given the approaching date of Miss Thorne's birthday." As they settled into their places, the chamber doors opened to admit Lord Hargrove himself, a corpulent man whose florid complexion and elaborate waistcoat proclaimed both self-indulgence and vanity. He strode forward with the confidence of one accustomed to deference, faltering only when his gaze fell upon Marien, seated beside the Duke of Kailmore. The blood drained from his face so rapidly that Marien feared he might collapse. "Impossible," he murmured, loud enough for those nearby to hear. "You cannot—" "Good morning, Lord Hargrove," the Duke interrupted, his voice carrying the precise mixture of courtesy and ice that only aristocratic breeding could produce. "How fortuitous that you arrive in time to hear the evidence of your financial misconduct presented in its entirety." Before Hargrove could formulate a response, the court clerk called for attention as Magistrate Sir William Fenton entered, a silver-haired man whose stern countenance suggested little patience for prevarication. The proceedings commenced with formal introductions, followed by Mr. Blackwood's presentation of the financial documentation. "The pattern, Sir William, is both consistent and damning," the solicitor concluded, after nearly an hour of meticulous exposition. Trust funds designated for Miss Thorne's maintenance and education were systematically diverted to accounts controlled exclusively by Lord Hargrove, while estate income from timber sales and tenant rents vanished entirely from official records. Sir William studied the ledgers spread before him, his expression growing increasingly severe. "These discrepancies are indeed troubling, Mr. Blackwood. However, documentation alone cannot establish intent. I must hear from the affected parties." "Of course, Your Honour." Blackwood bowed slightly. "I call Miss Marien Thorne to provide testimony regarding her experiences as Lord Hargrove's ward." The courtroom fell silent as Marien rose, her heart thundering against her ribs, yet her exterior presenting only composed dignity. She approached the witness stand with measured steps, conscious of every eye following her progress. Lord Hargrove's glare burned against her back, promising retribution should her courage falter. "Miss Thorne," Magistrate Fenton began once she had been sworn in, "pray describe your situation following your father's death 6 years ago." Marien clasped her hands before her, anchoring herself to the present moment. My father's will appointed Lord Hargrove as executor of the estate and my guardian until my 25th birthday, sir. I was removed from my family home in Northumberland to Lord Hargrove's London residence, where I was informed that my father had left substantial debts that consumed any inheritance I might have expected. And did you have reason to question this information? Not initially, Your Honour. Her voice strengthened as memories crystallized into testimony. I was 18, grieving and unfamiliar with legal and financial matters. Lord Hargrove presented himself as my benefactor, offering shelter and basic necessities while emphasizing that such charity strained his own resources. The magistrate's pen scratched across parchment as he made notes. When did you first suspect irregularities in your guardian's representations? Approximately 2 years ago. Marien's gaze remained steady, focused on Sir William rather than Hargrove's increasingly agitated countenance. I discovered correspondence addressed to my father regarding timber sales that had generated significant revenue, transactions that occurred just months before his death, yet were never mentioned by Lord Hargrove. And how did you come to see this correspondence? It was contained within a portfolio of documents I was instructed to organize as part of my household duties. She hesitated briefly, then continued with renewed determination. When I inquired about these transactions, Lord Hargrove became enraged. He accused me of meddling in matters beyond my understanding, confiscated the papers, and restricted my movements within the household. Objection! Hargrove's solicitor surged to his feet. These accusations are baseless, the natural resentments of a dependent relative against her generous benefactor. Sir William regarded the interruption with evident displeasure. Mr. Pembroke, this court observes formal procedures. You shall have opportunity to cross-examine the witness. He turned back to Marien. Please continue, Miss Thorne. What occurred following this confrontation? A systematic campaign began to undermine my credibility and emotional stability. Each word emerged clear and distinct, carrying the weight of long-suppressed truth. Items of value, jewelry, silver, personal papers, would disappear from the household, only to be discovered among my possessions. Lady Hargrove suggested to visitors that grief had affected my reason, while servants were instructed to monitor my activities as though I were untrustworthy. And the culmination of these events? Marien's hands tightened imperceptibly. 3 weeks ago, Lord Hargrove accused me of stealing family heirlooms, items I had never seen before they were produced from my wardrobe during a search I was not permitted to witness. He declared his intention to have me arrested and institutionalized, as clearly my criminal tendencies indicated mental instability. Gasps rippled through the courtroom at this revelation. The Duke's expression remained impassive, though Marien observed the white-knuckled grip with which he clasped his walking stick. How came you to escape this fate? Sir William inquired, his tone suggesting he had already surmised the answer. I fled that night, taking nothing but the clothes I wore. Marien's voice threatened to waver for the first time. I had no destination, no resources, no allies. When the carriage Lord Hargrove sent in pursuit located me on the Cumberland Road, I was removed by force and abandoned in the forest, miles from any habitation, as a winter storm approached. They intended your death, the magistrate stated bluntly. I believe so, Your Honour. Marien met his gaze directly. A death that would appear as misadventure, a disturbed young woman wandering confused into the wilderness. Lies! Lord Hargrove's composure finally shattered. The girl is delusional. She fled criminal charges proving her guilt and instability. I sent men to return her to proper care, nothing more. Lord Hargrove, Sir William's voice cracked like a whip, you will maintain decorum in this court or be removed. He returned his attention to Marien. How came you to survive this ordeal, Miss Thorne? Providence guided His Grace, the Duke of Cailmore, to where I had collapsed. Marien did not look toward the Duke as she spoke, knowing her expression might reveal more than wisdom permitted. He provided shelter, protection, and the means to seek justice for these wrongs. Sir William set down his pen, studying her with piercing intensity. Miss Thorne, you make grave accusations against a man of considerable standing. Are you prepared to swear to the truth of every word, understanding the consequences of perjury? I am, Your Honour. Her response rang with quiet certainty. Every statement I have made can be corroborated by witnesses or documentary evidence. Very well. The magistrate gestured toward Lord Hargrove's solicitor. Mr. Pembroke, you may cross-examine the witness. Pembroke approached with the predatory confidence of a man accustomed to intimidating those of lesser status. Miss Thorne, is it not true that you have developed an attachment to His Grace during your time at Cailmore Manor? The question, designed to suggest impropriety and thus undermine her credibility, hung in the air like poison gas. Marien felt heat rise to her cheeks, even as she maintained outward composure. "I have developed profound gratitude toward the Duke for his intervention and support," she replied carefully. "Any woman rescued from certain death would feel similarly." "Indeed?" Pembroke's smile suggested disbelief. "And might this gratitude motivate false accusations against your guardian, a man who has provided for you these 6 years?" "My testimony is motivated solely by truth, sir." Marien lifted her chin slightly. "A concept Lord Hargrove seems to find inconvenient." Murmurs of appreciation rippled through the spectators, quickly silenced by Sir William's stern glance. Pembroke, momentarily disconcerted, shifted tactics. "You claim Lord Hargrove misappropriated funds from your inheritance." He gestured dismissively toward the ledgers. "Yet you admit you possess no understanding of financial matters. How could you possibly identify legitimate business expenses versus supposed theft?" "I need not be a banker to recognize when rent collected from tenants never appears in estate accounts," Marien countered, "nor to understand that funds allocated for my education were never expended for that purpose, as I received no governess, no tutors, no access to masters of any kind after entering Lord Hargrove's household." Pembroke's expression soured as his attack failed to rattle her. "You speak of documents allegedly discovered among your father's papers. Can you produce these documents today?" "I cannot, as Lord Hargrove confiscated them," she replied evenly. "However, Mr. Blackwood has obtained duplicates from the timber merchant's own records, which correspond precisely to my recollection." "Convenient." Pembroke's tone dripped with insinuation. "And these supposed witnesses to your guardian's misdeeds, former servants with grudges, no doubt. Hardly reliable testimony." Before Marien could respond, the courtroom doors opened to admit a slight figure in modest but impeccable attire. A collective gasp rose as Lady Hargrove herself proceeded down the centre aisle, her patrician features set in grim determination. "I believe I qualify as a more substantial witness, Mr. Pembroke," she announced, her cultured voice carrying to every corner of the suddenly silent chamber. "And I have come to corroborate Miss Thorne's testimony in its entirety." Lord Hargrove half rose from his seat, face purpling with rage or fear, perhaps both. "Agatha, what madness is this?" Lady Hargrove did not deign to acknowledge her husband, instead addressing the magistrate directly. "Sir William, I request permission to provide testimony regarding my husband's treatment of Miss Thorne and his management of her inheritance." The courtroom erupted in astonished whispers as Sir William brought order with sharp raps of his gavel. "This is most irregular, Lady Hargrove, as is abandoning a young woman to die in winter," she replied with steel beneath her refined accent. "Irregularity seems the order of the day." Sir William considered briefly before nodding. "The court will hear your testimony, my lady. Miss Thorne, you may step down." As Marien returned to her seat beside the Duke, their eyes met in shared astonishment at this unexpected development. His hand briefly touched hers beneath the concealment of her shawl, a gesture of reassurance that steadied her racing pulse. Lady Hargrove took the witness stand with aristocratic poise, removing her gloves with deliberate motions that commanded attention. Once sworn in, she fixed her gaze on Sir William with the directness of one who has reached a momentous decision. "For 6 years I have witnessed my husband systematically defraud Miss Thorne of her rightful inheritance," she began, her voice gaining strength with each word. "I have observed him falsify accounts, intimidate servants who showed her kindness, and create a narrative of mental instability to justify his continued control of her father's estate." Lord Hargrove lunged to his feet. "Lies! She speaks from jealousy and spite." "Silence!" Sir William thundered. "One more outburst, sir, and you shall be removed from these proceedings." He nodded for Lady Hargrove to continue. 3 weeks ago," she resumed, her composure unshaken, "my husband entered my chambers in a state of agitation, declaring that Miss Thorne must be dealt with permanently before her approaching birthday. He instructed our coachman, James Crowe, to ensure she would not return from her journey to Cumberland." The magistrate's expression darkened. "You are describing conspiracy to commit murder, Lady Hargrove." "I am describing what occurred, sir." Her voice remained steady despite the enormity of her disclosure. "I have brought documentation to support these claims, private correspondence between my husband and his agents, along with the true accounts of the Thorne estate which he maintained separately from the falsified records provided to Miss Thorne's solicitors." "Mr." Blackwood stepped forward to accept the leather portfolio she extended. "With the court's permission, Your Honor, I shall examine these documents and incorporate them into our evidence." Sir William granted permission with a grave nod before returning his attention to Lady Hargrove. "May I inquire, my lady, what prompts this extraordinary testimony against your husband?" Lady Hargrove's aristocratic facade cracked slightly, revealing unexpected humanity beneath. "Complicity through silence became intolerable," she replied simply. "Miss Thorne's supposed death would have marked my final surrender to moral bankruptcy. I could not bear to purchase another day of privilege with her life." The admission, delivered without dramatic flourish, carried devastating credibility. Even Pembroke appeared momentarily bereft of counter-arguments as Lady Hargrove completed her testimony with precise details of financial improprieties and the systematic campaign to isolate and discredit Marien. When cross-examination produced no significant challenges to her account, Sir William called a recess to review the new evidence. The Duke guided Marien to a private antechamber where she could compose herself away from curious stares and Hargrove's venomous glares. "Lady Hargrove," Marien whispered once they were alone, "I never imagined—" "Few would." The Duke poured water from a crystal decanter, offering her the glass. "She has maintained a public persona of glacial detachment for decades. This revelation suggests depths unplumbed even by those who believed they knew her well. She risked everything." Marien accepted the water gratefully, her throat parched from tension. Her social position, her financial security, she reclaimed her honor, he corrected gently. A trade many would consider advantageous, regardless of worldly cost. Before Marien could respond, Mr. Blackwood entered, his usually composed features alight with satisfaction. "The magistrate will reconvene shortly," he announced. "Lady Hargrove's documents are extraordinary. Detailed records that confirm every aspect of our allegations, plus evidence of additional malfeasance we had not yet uncovered." "And Hargrove?" the Duke inquired, conferring frantically with Pembroke. Blackwood's thin lips curved in a rare smile. "Their options dwindle by the minute. The magistrate has already dispatched constables to secure the Thorne estate records against potential destruction." When the court reconvened 30 minutes later, a palpable shift had occurred in the chamber's atmosphere. Lord Hargrove sat slumped in apparent defeat, while his solicitor's expression suggested a man calculating damage limitations rather than planning victory. Sir William Fenton surveyed the assembly with the gravity of one who understands that lives and reputations hang upon his judgment. Having reviewed the evidence presented, including the extraordinary documentation provided by Lady Hargrove, this court finds compelling proof of financial malfeasance in Lord Hargrove's management of the Thorne estate. Relief washed through Marien like a physical force, nearly overwhelming her carefully maintained composure. The Duke's steady presence beside her provided anchor as the magistrate continued. "I hereby revoke Lord Hargrove's executorship with immediate effect. All Thorne properties and accounts shall be placed under court supervision until Miss Thorne's 25th birthday, now just 17 days hence." Sir William's gaze hardened as he addressed Hargrove directly. "Furthermore, sir, you shall surrender your passport to the court pending investigation of more serious charges, including conspiracy to commit grievous harm. Constables will escort you to provide surety before you may depart these premises." As Lord Hargrove was led away, ashen-faced and diminished, Marien felt no triumph, only a profound weariness and the first tentative unfurling of freedom. 6 years of subjugation ended with the rap of a magistrate's gavel, justice served through the unexpected courage of unlikely allies. "It is done," the Duke murmured beside her. "Your inheritance secured, your name cleared." "Not quite all is done," she replied softly, thinking of her father's unexplained death and the questions that remained unanswered. "But it is a beginning." His hand found hers beneath the concealment of the bench, a brief pressure communicating understanding beyond words. "A beginning," he agreed, "worthy of celebration." As they rose to depart, Lady Hargrove approached, her aristocratic bearing somewhat softened by the day's events. "Miss Thorne," she began with formal correctness, "I wish to express regret for my years of silent complicity in your mistreatment." Marien regarded the woman who had moved through the same household as a distant, chilly presence, neither ally nor active tormentor. "You found your voice when it mattered most, my lady. I can offer no greater commendation. You are generous beyond my deserving." Lady Hargrove's gaze shifted briefly to the Duke before returning to Marien. "I shall depart for my sister's home in Bath this evening. My solicitor will contact you regarding formal separation from Lord Hargrove, a process in which I hope you might provide testimony should it become necessary." "You have my word," Marien promised, recognizing the courage required for an aristocratic woman to contemplate such a scandalous step. With a final nod of acknowledgement, Lady Hargrove departed, her solitary figure straight-backed and resolute as she passed through the courtroom doors into an uncertain future of her own choosing. Snow fell in gentle spirals as they departed the courthouse, transforming Carlisle's grey stone edifices into fairy palaces crowned with ermine. The Duke guided Marien toward the waiting carriage, his hand protective at her elbow, his expression suggesting thoughts too complex for immediate articulation. "You must be exhausted," he observed, as the carriage pulled away from the curb. "The emotional demands of such proceedings exceed physical exertion." "Strange," she replied, watching crystalline flakes dissolve against the carriage window. "I feel lighter than I have in years, as though a weight has been lifted from my very soul." Justice, even partial, provides its own sustenance. His smile held genuine warmth, though I insist upon more substantial refreshment before we consider our next steps. Edward, who had remained at the hotel during the court proceedings, greeted their return with obvious relief and curiosity. Over a private luncheon in the Duke's suite, they recounted the extraordinary developments, Lady Hargrove's unexpected testimony, the magistrate's decisive ruling, and Hargrove's spectacular downfall. "Remarkable," Edward commented when they had concluded. "The woman appeared carved from ice whenever I encountered her at social gatherings. Who could have imagined such a conscience lurked beneath that glacial exterior? People rarely reveal their true nature in ballrooms and drawing rooms," Marien observed. "Masks become habitual until crisis demands their removal." The Duke regarded her with thoughtful appreciation. "Wisdom beyond your years, Miss Thorne." He rose, moving toward the window where afternoon light illuminated his strong profile. "We must now determine our course. The magistrate's ruling secures your immediate financial position, but questions regarding your father's death remain unanswered." Edward set down his wineglass with careful precision. "Pursuing such inquiries carries significant risk, Lucen. Hargrove retains connections in London, despite today's setback." "I am well acquainted with risk," Marien interjected quietly. "If evidence exists suggesting my father's death was not natural, I cannot rest until truth is established." The brothers exchanged glances, freighted with unspoken communication, before the Duke nodded decisively. "Then we proceed as planned. Mr. Blackwood has already initiated discreet inquiries regarding the physician who attended your father's final hours." "What of Lady Sophia?" Edward asked, directing the question to his brother. "She returns to Kailmore tomorrow, does she not?" A shadow crossed the Duke's features. Indeed, her sister's hospitality evidently reached its natural conclusion. Marien's heart constricted at this reminder of complications beyond the day's victory. The Duke's marital status, a fact momentarily eclipsed by the intensity of recent events, reasserted its immutable reality. "I should not return to Kailmore," she said softly. "Lady Sophia would hardly welcome my continued presence, particularly given today's developments. My wife's preferences do not dictate my household," the Duke replied, with unexpected sharpness. "Kailmore offers security while these matters resolve." Edward cleared his throat discreetly. "Perhaps alternative arrangements might prove more suitable. Lady Willoughby's establishment in Edinburgh, perhaps. She has often expressed willingness to chaperone young ladies of good family." The suggestion, though practical, struck Marien with unexpected force. The prospect of separation from the Duke, from the protection and companionship that had become central to her existence, created a hollow sensation beneath her ribs. "A sensible proposal," she agreed nonetheless, pride stiffening her spine. "I would not wish to create difficulties within your Grace's household." The Duke turned from the window, his expression unreadable. "We shall discuss alternatives tomorrow. Tonight I suggest rest and reflection. The day's events require processing." The conversation shifted to practicalities, their planned departure time, weather reports suggesting another storm approaching from the west, correspondence requiring attention before they left Carlisle. Throughout, Marien maintained composed participation, while her thoughts circled the inevitable separation that propriety and circumstance demanded. Later, alone in her chambers, she stood before the looking-glass, studying her reflection with newly objective eyes. The woman who gazed back appeared transformed from the desperate creature who had stumbled through winter woods weeks earlier, her posture straightened by vindication, her eyes clear with purpose restored. Yet beneath this exterior improvement lay a heart newly complicated by feelings she had no right to harbor. "Foolish girl," she whispered to her reflection, "to develop tender feelings for a married duke who merely fulfilled his noble obligations toward one in distress. A soft knock interrupted her self-admonishment. Opening the door revealed a hotel maid bearing a small package wrapped in silver paper. "From His Grace, miss," the girl explained with a curtsy. He requested immediate delivery. Alone once more, Marien carefully unwrapped the parcel to discover a velvet jeweler's box containing a modest brooch fashioned of silver and amber, the latter stone capturing golden light like frozen sunshine. A note accompanied the gift, written in the Duke's bold hand. "Miss Thorne, this humble token commemorates not my contribution to today's triumph, but your own courage in facing injustice with unwavering dignity. The amber reminds me of certain resilient blossoms that survive winter's harshest assault, emerging stronger for their ordeal. Wear it as a reminder that you never stood alone, even when circumstances suggested otherwise. With profound respect, LV." Tears threatened as Marien traced the brooch's simple elegance, not an extravagant gesture that might suggest impropriety, but a thoughtful acknowledgement of shared experience. She pinned it to her bodice, the amber catching firelight like a captured flame. Sleep came fitfully that night, her dreams populated by courtrooms where testimony never concluded and forests where rescue never arrived. She woke before dawn, drawn to the window where first light revealed a city transformed by overnight snowfall, pristine white concealing stone, and soot beneath nature's temporary purity. A message arrived with breakfast, requesting her presence in the hotel's private parlor at 10 o'clock. The Duke awaited her there, standing before a cheerfully blazing fire, his tall figure silhouetted against dancing flames. "Miss Thorne," he bowed formally, though his eyes warmed at the sight of the amber brooch adorning her gown. "I trust you slept well as circumstances permitted, Your Grace." She remained near the door, maintaining appropriate distance. "Your gift was most thoughtful. I shall treasure it as a remembrance of your kindness." "Not kindness," he corrected gently. "Recognition. You demonstrated remarkable fortitude throughout these ordeals." She inclined her head in acknowledgement. "You wish to speak with me regarding future arrangements?" "Indeed." He gestured toward chairs positioned before the fire, waiting until she was seated before continuing. "Edward departs for Edinburgh this afternoon to consult with Lady Willoughby regarding possible accommodation." "A sensible solution," Marien agreed, though the words tasted like ashes. "I should not wish to impose further upon your hospitality, particularly with Lady Sophia's return imminent." The Duke studied her with unsettling intensity. "Is that truly your desire, to remove to Edinburgh under a stranger's supervision?" The directness of the question caught her unprepared. "My desires have seldom factored in determining my circumstances, Your Grace. Perhaps they should." He leaned forward, hands clasped between his knees, a posture suggesting unexpected vulnerability from one typically so controlled. "I have received communication from London this morning. My solicitor reports that Lady Sophia has filed formal separation papers, citing irreconcilable differences of character and purpose." Marien's breath caught. I am sorry, Your Grace. My presence at Kailmore has clearly exacerbated tensions within your marriage. You misunderstand." A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "The papers were filed 3 weeks ago before your arrival at Thornfield Lodge. Their existence explains Lady Sophia's extended absence and her remarkable disinterest in the identities of guests at Kailmore." Understanding dawned slowly. "Your marriage was already a union, in name only, for several years," he confirmed quietly. "Maintained for appearances while legal settlements were negotiated. Lady Sophia's family demands substantial compensation for releasing her from a marriage that has produced no heir." Marien absorbed this revelation, uncertain how to respond, without revealing emotions too complex and inappropriate for articulation. "Why share this private matter with me, Your Grace?" The Duke rose, moving toward the window where morning light cast his features in sharp relief. "Because circumstances change, Miss Thorne. Obligations shift. Possibilities emerge where none existed before." He turned toward her, his expression unguarded for perhaps the first time since their acquaintance began. "And because I find myself increasingly unwilling to conceal truth from one who has suffered so greatly from others' deceptions." The implications of his words hung in the air between them, unspoken yet unmistakable. Marien's hands trembled slightly as she adjusted her shawl, seeking refuge in practical considerations. "Even so," she said carefully, "propriety demands certain appearances be maintained. Your reputation—" "Hang propriety," he interrupted with unexpected vehemence. "Has it served either of us well? You confined by its rigid expectations to endure years of mistreatment rather than seek escape that might invite scandal. Me trapped in a loveless union because duty demanded an heir and fortune demanded alliance. He moderated his tone with visible effort. I suggest an alternative to Edinburgh, which is, remain at Kailmore as my ward, legally, officially documented by the courts, until your birthday releases you from any requirement for guardianship. His gaze held hers steadily. Edward would remain as household companion and chaperone, ensuring no whisper of impropriety could attach to the arrangement. Marien considered the proposal, heart and mind engaged in silent warfare. And after my birthday? After your birthday, you would be a woman of independent means, free to determine your own path. Something flickered in his eyes. Hope, perhaps, or uncertainty uncharacteristic of his usual confidence. And I would be a man legally separated from an unsuccessful union, similarly free to consider new possibilities. The implication could not be misinterpreted. Heat rose to Marien's cheeks, even as her practical nature asserted itself. You offer a generous solution to my immediate circumstances, Your Grace, yet I wonder if proximity might create expectations that wisdom would counsel against. I expect nothing, he replied with quiet dignity. I hope, perhaps, but expectations, no. Your independence, so recently secured after years of subjugation, represents a treasure I would not presume to threaten. His understanding, his willingness to acknowledge her need for autonomy after so long beneath another's control, touched Marien more deeply than declarations of affection might have done. She rose, moving toward the fire where heat matched the warmth spreading through her chest. In that case, she said softly, I accept your proposal regarding guardianship. Kailmore has become, she hesitated, seeking appropriate words, a sanctuary I would be reluctant to leave before necessity demands. Relief visibly eased the tension in his shoulders. Then it is settled. We return to Kailmore this afternoon, weather permitting. He moved toward the door, pausing before exiting. One final matter, Miss Thorne. Yes, Your Grace? His expression softened into the rare, genuine smile that transformed his austere features. I believe, given our shared experiences and future association, more informal address might be permitted, at least in private conversation. You wish me to call you Lucien? The question emerged barely above a whisper. I wish, he replied with simple honesty, to hear my name spoken by someone who sees the man behind the title. With a slight bow, he departed, leaving Marien alone with possibilities as vast and transformative as the winter landscape beyond the window, where sunlight now gilded what had been merely white, revealing unexpected beauty in what once seemed only cold. Spring arrived at Kailmore with tentative grace, melting winter's harsh edges into rivulets that nourished dormant earth. 3 months had passed since the Carlisle magistrate's ruling, 3 months of quiet transformation as Marien stepped cautiously into her reclaimed identity as heiress to the Thorne estate. The legal guardianship arrangement had proceeded without complication. Sir William Fenton, impressed by the evidence presented during the hearing, had readily approved the Duke's petition to assume responsibility for Marien's affairs until her 25th birthday. Lord Edward had established himself as permanent resident at Kailmore during this period, his presence ensuring propriety, while his genuine affection for both his brother and their ward created an atmosphere of familial warmth the ancient manor had not known in generations. Lady Sophia's absence had become permanent, the separation proceedings advancing toward inevitable conclusion. London gossip, faithfully reported in Edward's correspondence with society acquaintances, speculated endlessly regarding the Duchess's removal to her family's Italian villa, though few connected these developments to the quiet arrival of a certain Miss Thorne at Kailmore. On this particular April morning, Marien walked alone through the manor's east gardens, where crocuses pushed defiantly through soil still bearing winter's memory. Her thoughts, like the season, balanced between reflection on darkness past and anticipation of brightness to come. In 3 days she would mark her 25th birthday, the threshold beyond which her independence would be fully realized, her inheritance secured beyond any guardian's control. The sound of approaching footsteps drew her attention. Lucien, for in private conversation she had indeed adopted the familiarity he requested, crossed the flagstone path with purposeful stride. I thought I might find you here, he called, sunlight catching the silver at his temples. Edward mentioned you had declined the carriage ride to Keswick. The gardens proved more tempting, she replied, smiling as he reached her side. Spring reveals itself first here, I've noticed. Something about the sheltering walls, perhaps. He studied her with the quiet intensity that had become familiar over their months of association, a gaze that seemed to perceive beyond superficial expression to the currents beneath. You seem pensive this morning. Reflective, she corrected gently. Much changes in 3 days' time. Indeed. He fell into step beside her as they continued along the gravel path. The solicitors have prepared all necessary documents transferring control of the Thorne properties. You'll be mistress of your ancestral home, should you wish to return to Northumberland. The statement, delivered with careful neutrality, contained questions he would not directly ask, about her intentions, her desires, her plans for a future suddenly wide with possibility. I have been considering that matter, she acknowledged, pausing beside a stone bench warmed by morning sun. Would you sit with me a moment? He joined her, maintaining proper distance despite the private location. These past months had established a delicate balance between them, genuine affection expressed through conversation, shared interests, and occasional lingering glances, yet always bounded by honor and her transitional status as his legal ward. I received correspondence yesterday, Marien continued, drawing a folded letter from her pocket. From Mr. Blackwood. The investigation into my father's death has reached its conclusion. Lucien's expression sharpened with interest. What has been discovered? Confirmation. Her voice remained steady, despite the weight of the knowledge she now carried. The physician who attended my father has confessed under questioning. Lord Hargrove arranged for a particular medication to be administered, ostensibly for my father's heart condition, but containing substances that would induce symptoms resembling apoplexy. Murder, Lucien stated flatly. As we suspected. Yes. Marien refolded the letter with careful precision. The physician's testimony, combined with the financial evidence and Lady Hargrove's statements, has resulted in formal charges. Lord Hargrove was taken into custody yesterday morning at his London residence. Lucien's hand moved as if to cover hers, then withdrew, the habitual restraint they had both maintained throughout their association. This brings a measure of justice, though it cannot restore what was taken from you. No, she agreed softly. 6 years cannot be reclaimed, yet there is value in truth acknowledged, in wrongs named for what they are. They sat in companionable silence, watching spring breeze ripple through new leaves. The comfortable quiet between them had become one of Marien's most treasured aspects of life at Kailmore, the ability to simply exist beside another soul without performance or pretense. What will you do? Lucien finally asked. When your birthday releases you from guardianship, will you return to Northumberland? Reclaim your family home? The question had occupied her thoughts increasingly as the date approached. The Thorne estate represented her birthright, her heritage, the physical manifestation of justice restored. Yet when she imagined herself within those walls, the vision felt strangely hollow, a triumph without joy. I have been thinking, she began carefully, that perhaps Northumberland might wait a while longer. His gaze returned to her face, hope carefully contained behind practiced reserve. You have other plans? Less plans than possibilities. Marien gathered her courage, venturing into territory they had circumnavigated for months. Cumberland has become dear to me. The landscape, the people, She hesitated before adding softly, the company. Something shifted in his expression, restraint giving way to cautious optimism. The company values your presence more than words might adequately express. The formal construction barely concealed emotions that had grown between them, nurtured through shared adversity, intellectual companionship, and gradual revelation of true character beneath social masks. When my birthday passes, Marien continued, heart quickening beneath her ribs, I will no longer be your ward. No, he agreed, his voice deepening. You will be entirely your own mistress, and you will soon be— She left the sentence unfinished, the implication clear. Free of prior obligations, he completed. The decree absolute is expected within the month. Lady Sophia has accepted the settlement terms. The timing, the convergence of her independence and his freedom seemed almost providential, as though fate had orchestrated their respective journeys toward this juncture. I should like to remain in Cumberland, she stated simply, at least until I determine where true happiness might be found. Hope kindled more visibly in his eyes. Kailmore would welcome your continued presence in any capacity you might consider appropriate. The careful phrasing, respecting her autonomy while suggesting broader possibilities, typified the consideration that had marked his treatment of her from the beginning. No presumption, no pressure, only space to determine her own path. 3 days remain of our current arrangement, Marien observed, rising from the bench as clouds temporarily obscured the spring sunshine. Perhaps during that interval we might discuss potential adjustments to our association once legal constraints have been removed. Lucien stood as well, formal courtesy masking deeper emotion. I should welcome such conversation, Miss Thorne. The reversion to formal address signaled recognition of proprieties still binding them. As they turned toward the manor, a gardener's boy approached at a run, face flushed with excitement. Your Grace, riders approaching from the south road. Lucien's expression shifted to alertness. How many? 3, Your Grace. One appears to be a lady. Marien and Lucien exchanged puzzled glances. They expected no visitors, and the spring roads remained difficult after winter's damage. We shall greet them properly, the Duke decided, offering his arm with formal correctness. Whatever wind brings travellers to Kailmore, hospitality demands welcome. As they proceeded toward the manor's entrance, Marien felt a curious sense of threshold crossing, as though these unexpected visitors heralded the final chapter of one story and perhaps the opening lines of another. The riders appeared around the final bend in the approach road as Marien and Lucien reached the manor's front steps. The leading figure, mounted on a spirited grey mare, rode with the confidence of one accustomed to commanding attention. As the party drew nearer, Marien's breath caught with recognition. Lady Hargrove, she whispered, unable to conceal her astonishment. The woman who had testified so decisively in Carlisle dismounted with practiced grace, her travelling attire suggesting hasty departure rather than planned journey. Her composure appeared strained as she approached, gloved hands clasped before her. Your Grace. She curtsied formally to the Duke before turning to Marien. Miss Thorne, I come directly from London with news that could not wait for conventional correspondence. You are welcome at Kailmore, Lady Hargrove, Lucien replied, though his tone suggested caution. Please, enter and refresh yourself after your journey. I fear refreshment must wait. Urgency underscored her typically controlled demeanour. Lord Hargrove has escaped custody. His whereabouts are unknown, but certain documents in his possession suggest he may seek revenge against those he holds responsible for his downfall. The warmth of the spring morning seemed to evaporate instantly. Marien's hand tightened upon the Duke's arm, her mind racing with implications. When did this occur? Lucien demanded, his posture shifting subtly to place himself between the women and potential threat. Yesterday evening. Lady Hargrove's aristocratic facade cracked slightly, revealing genuine fear beneath. I received warning from a sympathetic officer and departed immediately, pausing only to ensure you received this information with all possible haste. Edward appeared in the doorway, alerted by the arrival of unexpected guests. His expression sharpened as he registered the tension evident in the tableau before him. Brother, what transpires? Danger approaches, Lucien replied succinctly. Lord Hargrove has escaped justice and may seek retribution. Edward's response was immediate and practical. I shall alert the groundskeepers and stable hands. The North Tower offers defensible position if necessary. As the group moved swiftly into the manor's entrance hall, Lady Hargrove caught Marien's sleeve, drawing her slightly apart from the others. Miss Thorne, she began, voice pitched low for privacy. There is something you must know regarding my husband's state of mind. He blames you above all others, even above his Grace, for his downfall. His last words at our final meeting were that the Thorne girl shall not live to inherit what should have been mine. Cold dread settled in Marien's stomach. For you believe he means to kill me? I believe, Lady Hargrove replied with grim certainty, that he has already made one attempt upon your life. A second failure would be intolerable to his pride. As servants hastened to secure the manor's entrances, and Edward organized an impromptu defensive force from estate workers, Lucan drew Marien into the library, the most easily secured room with its single door and limited windows. You shall remain here, he instructed, his tone brooking no argument. Edward and I will ensure the manor's defenses. For perhaps the first time since their acquaintance began, Marien found herself opposing his directive. I will not hide while others risk themselves on my behalf. Lord Hargrove is my burden to bear. Your safety is paramount, he countered, the intensity of his concern evident in his rigid posture. Hargrove is desperate, with nothing left to lose. Such men are unpredictable and dangerous beyond reason. All the more reason I should not cower in the library. Determination straightened her spine. I have spent 6 years as victim and ward, Lucien. I will not spend my final days before independence continuing in that role. Something in her expression must have conveyed the futility of argument. or his stance softened slightly. Then at least remain with me, where I can— He stopped, recalibrating his approach, where we might face whatever comes together. The concession, imperfect but sincere, acknowledged her right to agency even as it revealed the depth of his concern. Marien nodded agreement, reconciling independence with the recognition that true strength sometimes lies in alliance rather than isolation. As afternoon shadows lengthened across Kailmore's ancient stones, the manor settled into watchful waiting. Servants positioned at strategic viewpoints, Lady Hargrove installed in the east wing with her travelling companions, Edward patrolling the perimeter with the steadiest of the estate workers. Through it all, Lucien remained at Marien's side, their shared vigilance cementing bonds that transcended formal guardianship. Whether Lord Hargrove would indeed appear, and what final confrontation might ensue, remained written in the uncertain pages of the hours ahead. Yet Marien found herself strangely calm, as though the journey from victim to victor had already completed its essential arc, regardless of what trials might yet await. The 25th anniversary of Marien's birth dawned with mist rising like bridal veils from Kailmore's ancient grounds. She stood at her chamber window, watching gold-tinged vapor dissolve against strengthening sunlight, nature's perfect metaphor for the path her life had traveled. From winter's deadly grasp to spring's renewal, from desperate flight to purposeful stand, the transformation seemed almost mythical in retrospect. Lord Hargrove had indeed arrived at Kailmore 3 days prior, though not in the manner anyone anticipated. His body was discovered at the estate's boundary stone, the apparent victim of his own desperate haste. His horse had stumbled on the treacherous mountain path, throwing its rider against unyielding granite. The man who had orchestrated so much suffering had met his end not through justice's intervention, but through nature's indifference to human schemes. The discovery had prompted complex emotions in Marien, relief intermingled with a curious emptiness where hatred might have resided. In death, Hargrove appeared diminished, a shell emptied of the malevolence that had driven him. She had stood beside his covered form, feeling neither triumph nor satisfaction, only quiet acknowledgement that one chapter had concluded. Justice comes in unexpected forms, Lucien had observed as they watched the local magistrate document the circumstances. Not always as we might design, yet perhaps as Providence intends. Now as morning light transformed the landscape, Marien completed her toilette with particular care. The gown she selected, emerald silk that enhanced the auburn highlights in her hair, had been delivered the previous evening, a birthday gift from Lady Hargrove, who had remained at Kailmore after unexpected circumstances extended her visit. A soft knock preceded the entrance of Mrs. Winters, the housekeeper whose initial reserve had gradually warmed to genuine affection during Marien's residence. "A beautiful morning for such an occasion, Miss Thorne," she observed, depositing a bouquet of early spring flowers beside the dressing table. "His Grace requests your presence in the morning room when you are prepared to receive birthday greetings." Marien smiled her thanks, adding the final touches to her appearance, a modest pearl necklace inherited from her mother and the amber brooch that had commemorated her court victory months earlier. The combination, old legacy and new beginning, seemed fitting for a day that represented both culmination and threshold. The morning room occupied the manor's southeast corner, capturing early light through tall windows that overlooked gardens, now showing definitive evidence of spring's advance. As Marien entered, she found not only Lucien awaiting her, but a small gathering of those who had become her unlikely family. Edward, whose gentle humor had sustained her through difficult transitions, Lady Hargrove, whose testimony had secured justice, Mr. Blackwood, who had travelled from London for this significant occasion, and Mrs. Winters, representing the household staff who had embraced her presence. "Miss Thorne," Lucien stepped forward, formal address maintaining propriety before witnesses despite the warmth evident in his expression. "May I be the first to wish you felicitations on reaching this significant milestone." "Thank you, Your Grace." She curtsied, the gesture containing a hint of playfulness that only he would recognize. "The day arrives with particular sweetness after the journey preceding it." Edward approached next, bowing over her hand with theatrical flourish. "Many happy returns, Miss Thorne. I have composed a poetic tribute to mark the occasion, but Lucien threatens dire consequences should I actually recite it." Laughter lightened the atmosphere as each guest offered congratulations. Mr. Blackwood presented a portfolio containing the final documents, transferring full control of the Thorne estate to her management, the legal culmination of their long battle for justice. "Your father would be immensely proud," the the solicitor remarked as she examined the papers bearing official seals, not merely of the inheritance restored, but of the courage demonstrated in securing it. As morning progressed to midday, additional visitors arrived, local gentry paying respects to both the Duke and his ward, whose story had spread through Cumberland society in carefully modulated versions that preserved dignity while acknowledging triumph over adversity. Marien received their good wishes with gracious composure, navigating social currents with newfound confidence. Lady Hargrove, observing from a quiet corner, eventually approached during a momentary lull in arrivals. "You manage the attention admirably," she noted, genuine approval warming her typically reserved demeanor. "Many in your position might either shrink from such scrutiny or indulge excessively in its novelty." "I have had excellent models of dignity under pressure," Marien replied, acknowledging the older woman's own remarkable composure throughout recent events. "Though I confess some relief that the formal celebrations conclude with luncheon." "Indeed," Lady Hargrove's gaze held unexpected perceptiveness. "I had understood from His Grace that a private celebration was planned for this evening." Heat rose unbidden to Marien's cheeks. "A small dinner among close acquaintances, I believe." The ghost of a smile touched Lady Hargrove's lips. "How fortunate that Edward and I depart for Keswick this afternoon, then." The deliberate nature of the information, the implicit acknowledgement of developing circumstances, suggested approval rather than censure. Before Marien could formulate response, Lucien appeared at her elbow, his presence steady and reassuring as always. "The luncheon is prepared," he announced. "If you would do me the honor, Miss Thorne." The meal proceeded with pleasant conversation and understated elegance, the Duke of Kelmore entertaining guests without ostentation, yet with impeccable hospitality. Throughout, Marien caught his gaze upon her with increasing frequency, something expectant and almost boyishly nervous, visible beneath his customary composure. As guests began departing afterward, Edward made a point of announcing his intention to accompany Lady Hargrove to Keswick, where both would remain overnight before her journey continued southward. The choreographed nature of these arrangements became increasingly apparent, though maintained with sufficient discretion to prevent unseemly speculation. When the final carriage had departed down Kailmore's winding drive, Marien found herself alone with Lucien in the library, their shared sanctuary throughout the months of her residence. Late afternoon sun slanted through tall windows, illuminating dust motes that danced like golden snow in the quiet air. "At last," he remarked, shoulders relaxing visibly as he closed the heavy oak door. "I feared they might linger until midnight." Marien laughed softly, the sound reflecting newfound lightness. "You arranged their departures with impressive efficiency." Edward required minimal persuasion. A smile transformed his features, removing years of care. He threatened to compose an ode to the occasion if I failed to proceed as planned. "Proceed with what, precisely?" She met his gaze directly, emboldened by the day's significance and the months of growing understanding between them. Rather than answering immediately, Lucien crossed to a cabinet normally kept locked, removing a small wooden box inlaid with mother-of-pearl. "I have something for you," he said, returning to where she stood. "A gift to mark not merely your birthday, but your full emancipation from guardianship." He opened the box to reveal a ring, not an ostentatious diamond, but a perfect oval amber set in antique silver, the stone capturing light like imprisoned flame. "This belonged to my grandmother," he explained, voice softening with memory. "A woman of remarkable independence and courage, who managed Kailmore through war and hardship while her husband served abroad. She specified it should pass to a woman of similar spirit." Marien gazed at the ring, its beauty enhanced by history and intention rather than monetary value. "It's exquisite. There is no obligation attached," he added hastily. "I wish that to be absolutely clear. Your independence, so recently secured, represents a precious achievement I would not presume to compromise." The careful qualification, his consistent respect for her autonomy, confirmed what her heart had already determined. "And if I wished for the ring to represent precisely such an obligation?" Hope blazed in his eyes, though he maintained careful restraint. "Then I would ask, properly and formally, Marien Thorne, would you consider joining your path to mine? Not as ward, but as equal partner in whatever future we might forge together." The question, anticipated yet still overwhelming in its actuality, rendered her momentarily speechless, not from uncertainty but from the profound recognition of journey completed and new journey beginning. "From the moment you found me in the snow," she finally replied, voice steady despite the emotion beneath. You have treated me not as object of charity, but as person of value. That recognition, more than any material restoration, healed what Hargrove sought to destroy. She extended her hand, a gesture containing both acceptance and assertion of choice freely made. Yes, Lucen Vareth, I would join my path to yours, not in gratitude for rescue, but in recognition of the heart revealed through actions when words would have proved insufficient. He slipped the ring onto her finger, the amber warming instantly against her skin. Then, with reverence that acknowledged the significance of the moment, he raised her hand to his lips. The official announcement must wait until the decree becomes absolute, he noted practically. Another month, perhaps 6 weeks at most. Time enough to properly close one chapter before beginning another, she agreed. Practicality balancing emotion in the manner that had become their shared approach to life's complexities. As twilight gathered beyond Kael'Mur's ancient walls, Lucen led Marien to the East Garden, where their earlier conversation had been interrupted by Lady Hargrove's arrival. Spring flowers had continued their determined emergence during intervening days, creating a landscape of renewal where winter's grip had so recently dominated. I have often wondered, Marien mused as they walked paths illuminated by the day's fading light, what might have happened had you not ridden through that particular forest on that specific evening. Providence, he replied without hesitation. Some journeys are mapped by higher wisdom than our own. She considered this, finding comfort in the perspective. Then perhaps all that preceded even Hargrove's cruelty served purpose beyond our understanding. Not purpose that justifies suffering, he clarified, but purpose that redeems it through what follows. The distinction reflected the moral clarity that had first drawn her to him, the capacity to acknowledge life's complexities without surrendering to cynicism or despair. As darkness settled more fully across the landscape, Lucen guided her toward a secluded corner where something unexpected awaited. A small table set for intimate dinner, surrounded by lanterns whose light mimicked the amber of her ring. Your birthday celebration, he explained as a footman materialized to seat them. Private, as you preferred. The thoughtfulness of the arrangement, recognizing her discomfort with excessive attention while still marking the occasion's significance, typified the consideration that had characterized their evolving relationship. As they dined beneath stars emerging in the spring sky, conversation flowing with the easy intimacy of souls genuinely aligned, Marien reflected on the extraordinary journey from that snow-covered forest to this lantern-lit garden. From desperation to hope, from isolation to connection, from mere survival to anticipated joy, the transformation seemed almost too profound for simple narrative. Yet one truth emerged with crystal clarity. The heart left to die in winter's cold had not merely survived but flourished, nurtured by respect, warmed by understanding, and ultimately transformed by love that recognized worth beyond circumstance or station. In that recognition lay the true inheritance, one no guardian could control and no adversary could diminish. The amber ring caught lantern light as Marien raised her glass in quiet toast. Two paths converged, she offered softly. Lucen's eyes, warm with promise, met hers across the small table. And journeys shared, he completed, the words a covenant more binding than any legal document that had occupied their recent months. Above them, stars continued their eternal procession across the heavens, constant witnesses to human struggles and triumphs, to endings that become beginnings, to love that transforms even winter's cruelest assault into spring's most tender promise. In life's harshest winters, when justice seems distant and cruelty prevails, remember that the most profound strength often awakens in our darkest moments. Marien's journey teaches us that true dignity cannot be stripped away by circumstances, only surrendered by choice. When we stand firm in our truth, even against overwhelming odds, we discover reservoirs of courage we never knew we possessed. Yet the story also reminds us that independence need not mean isolation. The human heart, like Marien's amber ring, captures light most beautifully when it acknowledges connection without surrendering autonomy. We are strongest not when we stand entirely alone, but when we choose allies who respect our boundaries while supporting our growth. Perhaps most importantly, this tale whispers that love in its truest form never demands surrender of self, but rather celebrates the unique spirit it encounters. The Duke valued Marien not for her estate or social position, but for the unflinching dignity with which she faced adversity. In turn, she loved him not for rescue provided, but for respect consistently demonstrated. Let us carry forward this understanding, that our worth transcends our circumstances, that justice may arrive through unexpected pathways, and that hearts once abandoned to winter's cold can still bloom in spring's gentle promise, forever changed, but ultimately stronger for the journey endured. If you enjoyed Left to Die in the Winter's Cold, please subscribe to our channel for weekly romantic tales filled with noble rescues, dramatic confessions, and love that transcends social boundaries. Every Friday, we bring you new stories of hearts finding their way through the complexities of Victorian society. Drop a comment below sharing your favorite moment from Marien and Lucien's journey. Was it his discovery of her in the snow, the dramatic courtroom confrontation, or perhaps the tender garden proposal? Your engagement helps our storytelling community grow, and don't forget to share this video with friends who appreciate tales of resilience, redemption, and romance that warms even the coldest winter's day. Until next week, may your own story be filled with dignity, courage, and hearts that recognize your true worth.